Okay, so
Yeah.
what if everything we think we know about ancient Egypt, the very origins of civilization itself, what if it's just wrong? Like, what if the secrets of the pyramids aren't just hidden in plain sight? What if they've actually been deliberately overlooked? Because maybe they point to something, well, something far more incredible, something that our history books say just shouldn't exist. Welcome to the cool, weird, and possible. Today, we're diving deep. We're going to look at some really fascinating, maybe even controversial sources and ideas. Our mission really is to explore this question. Could an advanced, forgotten culture, maybe the mythical Atlantis, have shaped monumental structures like the pyramids and the Sphinx? We're going to try and uncover some surprising facts, look at different perspectives on these mysteries, and really examine that potential link. So let's start with these maps. I mean, how much do we actually know about ancient mapping? Because when you look at some of these old charts, they seem to possess knowledge that, well, it feels impossible for their time.
Yeah, it's a really good place to begin, actually, because figuring out longitude,
Mm,
your east-west position when you're out at sea, that was a huge historical challenge.
right.
You could work out your latitude, your north-south position, fairly easily from the sun or stars. But knowing exactly how far east or west you were, that was tough. Western civilization didn't really crack it reliably until the mid-18th century. That's when they developed accurate clocks, marine chronometers
What?
that could keep precise time on a moving ship.
Mid-18th century.
Yeah.
Wow.
Before that, think about someone like Columbus sailing the Atlantic. He was largely relying on, well, estimations, dead reckoning, kind of hoping he hit the target. It was pretty rough guesswork.
Okay, and this is where it gets really weird, isn't it? Because our sources point to these specific maps.
Yeah.
They call them anomalous. You've got the Orontius Phineas world map from the mid-1500s,
Hmm.
and the Piri-Reis map that's early 1500s. And the claim is these maps, which were apparently based on even older maps that are now lost, they show incredibly accurate relative longitudes.
That's the core of it. Accurate relative longitudes, meaning the distances between places east to west were mapped with a precision that theoretically shouldn't have been possible until those chronometers came along centuries later.
How is that even possible?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it gets even stranger with the Orontius Phineas map. What's really mind-bending about that one is it shows Antarctica.
Antarctica. But wait,
Yeah. Our civilization as we know it didn't officially discover Antarctica until 1820. Yet there it is, on this map from the 1500s.
just like a vague blob at the bottom.
No, that's the thing. It shows coastlines, even indications of rivers and mountains in the interior features that would only be visible if the continent wasn't covered in ice. Compare that to, say, the Pinkerton world map from 1813, just 7 years before Antarctica's official discovery.
Hmm.
Pinkerton was honest. He just showed blank space down there because, as far as Europeans knew then, nothing had been found.
So the Orontius Phineas map isn't just showing something there, it's showing it in detail and ice-free.
Yeah.
That's a huge anomaly.
It absolutely is. It really challenges our neat timeline of exploration and discovery.
And it gets even deeper, right? Because these maps, they often seem to depict the world not as it is now, but as it looked during the last ice age.
Exactly. We're talking about a time when sea levels were drastically lower, maybe 400 feet lower, than today.
400 feet, so coastlines would be totally different.
Completely different. Think Southeast Asia, the Malaysian Peninsula, Indonesia, Borneo. They weren't islands then. They were all connected in one giant landmass. Geologists call it the Sunda Shelf or Sundaland.
Wow.
And New Guinea was joined to Australia. So, yeah, the world looked vastly different.
So the question becomes, how could someone, thousands and thousands of years ago, before the ice melted and the seas rose, map that world? And map it accurately. We're talking way before known civilizations supposedly had that capability.
It suggests a level of global mapping technology, maybe seafaring ability too, that just doesn't fit the standard historical model for that deep past, for the pre-Ice Age world. Now, the mainstream archaeological view, the establishment take, is often that these maps are partly fantasy, maybe imaginative drawings by map makers who just felt there should be a southern continent for balance,
Yeah.
filled in the details.
Just made it up.
Essentially, yeah. Or that the similarities are coincidences, misinterpretation of the drawings. But the alternative perspective, the one pushed by researchers looking into these anomalies, treats them as a huge puzzle. They argue these maps are potential evidence that somebody, some unknown civilization perhaps, was charting the globe long before our recorded history suggests, and doing it with surprising sophistication.
Okay, but if there was this advanced ancient seafaring civilization, Where are the boats? Where's the physical proof? Like, we don't find shipwrecks that are older than maybe 6,000 years. The Dakos wreck in Greece is often cited.
That's a fair point, and it's one the mainstream often raises. The lack of really ancient shipwrecks.
So no ships, no sailors.
Well, not necessarily. Think about this.
Yeah.
We accept that humans colonized Cyprus 12,500 years ago. Cyprus is an island. You need sophisticated ships to get there, especially with enough people to start a colony.
Okay.
And Australia. Humans arrived there at least 50,000 years ago. That required crossing a minimum of 90 kilometers of open water from Southeast Asia, even when sea levels were lower. Again, you need capable watercraft for that.
And have we found any 12,500-year-old ships near Cyprus? Or 50,000-year-old boats near Australia?
Nope, not a single one.
Yeah.
Wood, ropes, sails. They just don't survive that long under most conditions, especially in the ocean.
Ah, so the absence of evidence isn't necessarily evidence of absence.
Exactly. The fact that people made those journeys is proof the technology existed, even if the artifacts themselves haven't lasted. It suggests sophisticated navigation, capable of carrying significant numbers of people, existed much, much earlier than those 6,000-year-old wrecks imply.
Right, so maybe the proof isn't just in sunken ships. Maybe it's staring us in the face in Egypt. Let's pivot to the Sphinx. The Great Sphinx of Giza. What if it holds the clues? What if it's way older than the pharaohs?
Okay, the Sphinx. The standard Egyptological view, the one you'll find in most textbooks, is that it was carved by Pharaoh Khafre. He was part of the 4th dynasty, ruling around 2500 BC. They see it as basically a giant guardian statue for his pyramid complex.
Makes sense on the surface. Big statue, big pyramid nearby.
Yeah, it fits the conventional narrative.
But there's a major counter-argument, isn't there? People like the geologist Robert Schoch, they look at the Sphinx and say, no way, this is much older, like potentially 12,000 years old.
That's right. And they base this on a couple of key lines of evidence.
Okay, what are they?
First, there's astronomy. The Sphinx is a lion. It faces due east. Around 10,500 BC, which is roughly 12,500 years ago, the constellation rising directly in front of the Sphinx at dawn on the spring equinox was Leo.
The lion.
Leo rising in front of the lion. Precisely. And proponents of the older date point out that later Egyptian eras align with their astrological ages too. You see ram-headed sphinxes at Karnak from the age of Aries. You see bull symbolism connected to the earlier age of Taurus. So the Sphinx, being a lion, seems to point firmly to the age of Leo, thousands of years before Khafre.
That's pretty specific. What's the second reason?
The geology. This is really Schoch's main argument as a geologist. He looks at the erosion patterns on the body of the Sphinx itself, and crucially, on the walls of the ditch or enclosure it sits in, which was carved out of the bedrock at the same time.
And what does the erosion show?
He argues it shows classic signs of water erosion. Specifically, heavy rainfall running down the stone, creating deep vertical fissures and rounded scallop profiles. It's not the kind of wind and sand erosion you'd expect in a desert environment over 4,000 to 500 years.
Rainfall. But Giza's in the Sahara Desert.
It is now. But the climate records show that around 12,000 years ago, at the end of the last ice age, the Sahara was actually green and fertile. It received significant rainfall. That period of heavy rain ended long before 2500 BC. The time of Khafre.
So the weathering pattern fits a much earlier, wetter climate period.
That's the geological argument, and it's a major sticking point because it directly challenges the established timeline based on stylistic comparisons or assumed context. It suggests the core structure of the Sphinx could be thousands of years older than its supposed builder.
And isn't there also something about what the local people believe, the Egyptians living right there?
Yeah, that's interesting too. People in the nearby village, Nazlet El Semen, sometimes referred to the Sphinx as Abul-Hol, which means father of terror. And there's a local tradition or feeling that it's incredibly ancient, as old as time itself, partly based on just how weathered and eroded it looks compared to other structures. It's anecdotal, of course, but it resonates with the geological observations. Okay, so let's move from the Sphinx to the Great Pyramid, Khufu's pyramid. The sheer scale is just hard to comprehend. We're talking about 6 million tons of stone.
6 million tons.
Originally stood about 481 feet high. It lost its top bit, maybe 30 feet, in an earthquake centuries ago, so it's around 450 feet now, but still massive.
And the official story is this was built as a tomb for Pharaoh Khufu.
Yes, during his reign in the 4th dynasty, supposedly constructed in just 23 years.
Okay, wait. 23 years. For that, I mean, from an engineering perspective,
Yeah.
does that time frame even seem possible? Experts I've read argue that's just wildly unrealistic.
It's incredibly ambitious, to put it mildly. quarrying, transporting, lifting, and precisely placing millions of stone blocks, some weighing many tons, in just over 2 decades. The logistics are staggering.
It feels more like a multi-generational project, doesn't it? And the precision involved. It suggests something more than just ramps and ropes. It implies some kind of, I don't know, extraordinary technology that maybe we just don't grasp yet.
Well, the technology question is central. And interestingly, we're still finding new things inside the pyramid. Recent projects using muon scanning, think of it like a cosmic ray X-ray, have detected huge, previously unknown voids or cavities.
Really? What kind of voids?
One seems to be enormous, possibly like another grand gallery situated above the one we already know.
Huh?
And remember those small shafts leading out from the king's and queen's chambers? They found little doors blocking them, complete with what looked like metal handles or fittings.
Metal handles. Inside the Great Pyramid shafts.
Yep. It strongly suggests there are still hidden chambers, undiscovered aspects, even after all this time. Secrets remain locked inside.
And beyond the hidden stuff, there's the stuff in plain sight that's just baffling. The precision, for instance. Its alignment to true north, south, east, and west is almost perfect. How did they achieve that?
That alignment is remarkable. And proponents of alternative theories point out how its dimensions seem to encode astronomical data, particularly relating to the Earth itself and the cycle of precession.
Precession, that's the slow wobble of the Earth's axis, right? Like a spinning top.
Exactly. It causes the position of the stars at the equinoxes to slowly shift over thousands of years. One full cycle takes about 25,920 years. And you see numbers related to this cycle, like 72, the number of years it takes for the equinox point to shift 1 degree, or multiples like 43,200, appearing not just in the pyramid's potential geometry, but in myths and sacred architecture around the world.
So numbers like 72 and 43,200 keep popping up globally.
They do, in various ancient traditions. The argument is that this isn't just coincidence. It points to a highly sophisticated ancient science that understood astronomy and Earth's measure with incredible accuracy. But getting back to the construction, despite all the theories, external ramps, internal ramps, water shafts, lifting blocks, the honest answer from mainstream Egyptology is still essentially, we don't know for sure how it was built.
Really, they don't have a definitive answer.
Not one with conclusive proof. The default explanation often involves immense manpower, sledges, and maybe wetting the sand to reduce friction, but there's surprisingly little direct archaeological evidence confirming how they managed the heaviest stones or achieved that level of precision on such a scale. It remains a genuine mystery.
Which, opens the door to more speculative ideas, like those ancient myths you sometimes hear about priests using sound, like singing the blocks into place or using chants to levitate stones. Could that be a distorted folk memory? A hint of some lost sonic technology?
It's highly speculative, of course. There's zero physical evidence for sonic levitation or anything like it. But when faced with such an unexplained feat of engineering, people look for unconventional answers, sometimes finding echoes in mythology.
And maybe this idea of lost technology, of unexplained sophistication, maybe that's the bridge. Could these maps, the potentially ancient Sphinx, the baffling pyramids, could they be the legacy, the fingerprints of a lost civilization? Maybe even Atlantis, left behind after it vanished.
Well, that connection, specifically between Egypt and a lost high civilization, brings us to figures like Edgar Cayce. He was an American clairvoyant, famous for his readings given while in a trance state.
The sleeping prophet, right.
That's him. And in these readings, he spoke extensively about Atlantis. He described it as a highly advanced civilization, technologically and spiritually, located, he said, in a vast area stretching from the Gulf of Mexico over towards Gibraltar.
And what happened to it, according to Cayce?
He claimed it was destroyed in a series of cataclysms, the final one around 10,500 BC, which is interestingly close to that age of Leo alignment for the Sphinx, due to the misuse of powerful energy sources, specifically involving large crystals.
Wow. And the Egypt connection.
Cayce asserted that Atlantean refugees escaped the final destruction and traveled to various parts of the world, including Egypt. And was these refugees, he claimed, who brought advanced knowledge and were responsible for designing and building the Great Pyramid and the Sphinx.
Didn't he also make a very specific prediction about finding something near the Sphinx?
He did. He spoke of a hall of records, an underground library or repository supposedly located near the Sphinx's right paw. He claimed it contained records from Atlantis, as well as the history of ancient Egypt and humankind, and that it would be rediscovered during a time of significant global upheaval or change. Now, while Cayce's readings are outside mainstream science, what's intriguing is that you can find potential echoes within ancient Egyptian texts themselves. Take the Temple of Horus at Edfu. It's relatively late, Ptolemaic era, around 280 BC, but it contains inscriptions known as the Edfu building texts. And crucially, these texts are written in Middle Kingdom Egyptian, a much older form of language from maybe 2000 BC or earlier.
So the texts themselves are copies of much older material.
That's the implication. They seem to be preserving ancient traditions. And these texts describe a primeval homeland of the gods, an island.
An island homeland.
Yes, an island that was destroyed by some catastrophe. One text mentions something like a great serpent that came down from the sky and was then swallowed by the sea in a great flood.
Sounds familiar.
It does. And the texts say that survivors, these gods or wise beings, came to Egypt. They established the first primeval mounds on which later temples and perhaps the pyramids were founded. They were seen as bringing civilization.
And the timing.
Well, if the texts date back to around 2000 BC, and they're talking about events maybe 7,000 years before that, you add it up, you get to around 9,000 BC. That's remarkably close to the date Plato gave for the destruction of Atlantis, around 9600 BC.
So, this ancient Egyptian account, it could actually be the original source that Plato later drew upon for his Atlantis story. It suggests that Atlantis wasn't just some philosophical fable Plato made up, as many scholars argue.
It certainly opens up that possibility. It grounds the Atlantis story in a potentially much older indigenous Egyptian tradition about a flood, survivors, and the founding of their own civilization.
And Atlantis isn't the only candidate for a lost civilization, right? People talk about the Sunda Shelf, that submerged landmass in Southeast Asia, or Kumari Kundam, a supposed lost continent south of India.
That's true. The idea of a sophisticated ancestral civilization lost to rising sea levels or catastrophe isn't limited to just the Atlantic. This whole idea of advanced knowledge coming from the past, whether from a lost human civilization or elsewhere, often overlaps with another, even more controversial theory, the ancient astronaut hypothesis.
Ah, the aliens built the pyramids idea.
Essentially, yes. The core idea is that extraterrestrial beings visited Earth in deep antiquity, interacted with early humans, gave them technology or knowledge, and were perhaps remembered as gods or mythical figures.
And proponents point to things like, well, the pyramids themselves, arguing humans couldn't have built them alone,
Yep.
or interpretations of old texts.
Exactly. Eric von Däniken is probably the most famous proponent. He looked at structures like the pyramids, Stonehenge, the Nazca lines, and argued they required alien intervention. Others interpret passages in religious texts like the description of Vimanas or flying chariots in the Hindu Ramayana, or Ezekiel's vision of wheels within wheels in the Bible as descriptions of alien spacecraft.
Right, or even looking at old paintings and seeing things that look like UFOs in the background.
Medieval art sometimes contains aerial objects that proponents interpret as UFOs, though art historians usually have more mundane explanations involving religious symbolism. Now, it's crucial to state that mainstream science and archaeology overwhelmingly reject ancient astronaut theories. They're generally classified as pseudoscience.
Why such a strong rejection?
Critics argue these theories often rely on misinterpreting evidence, taking artifacts out of context, or underestimating the capabilities of ancient human cultures. There's what some call counterfeiting mechanisms,
Like what?
like presenting ambiguous rock art without its cultural context. For example, that Sahara rock painting, sometimes called the Martian God, the original archaeologist who found it jokingly used that term. But it's clearly a stylized human figure within the known artistic traditions of the area, not an alien visitor.
Or distorting scale.
Yes, like calling the Nazca lines an airport. Some of those geoglyphs ancient astronaut theorists focus on are actually quite small, maybe only a few meters across, hardly a landing strip. The argument is that proponents often display an unwarranted skepticism towards established archaeological findings while uncritically accepting very speculative interpretations.
But they are popular theories.
They absolutely are. They offer dramatic, exciting explanations for mysteries, which can be more appealing to some than they offer slower, more complex, and sometimes less conclusive answers provided by painstaking scientific research.
Which brings up a really interesting point. If you have these genuine anomalies, the maps, the Sphinx erosion, the pyramid's precision, and you have these alternative interpretations, some pointing to lost civilizations, some even to aliens, why is there such a strong pushback from mainstream academia? What makes the establishment so hesitant, maybe even unwilling, to seriously consider possibilities outside their current framework?
That's a really complex question about how science and knowledge progress. Part of it is just the nature of science. It tends to be conservative. It relies on repeatable evidence, peer review, and building incrementally on existing well-tested theories.
So extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence.
Exactly. And introducing something as paradigm shifting as a forgotten advanced global civilization or extraterrestrial contact shaping human history, that would require overturning fundamental understandings in archaeology, history, anthropology, maybe even physics.
Mm.
The burden of proof is incredibly high.
So it's not necessarily a conspiracy to suppress truth, but more about the high standards of scientific evidence.
For many academics, yes. They would argue that while the anomalies are interesting puzzles, the evidence presented for these radical alternative explanations, Atlantis, aliens, etc., simply doesn't meet that high burden of proof needed to rewrite our entire understanding of the past. It remains speculative, however intriguing.
So we're left with these enduring mysteries. If the evidence for a highly advanced civilization that maybe sailed the world, mapped its ancient geography long before we thought possible, and perhaps influenced the very foundations of Egyptian monuments, if that evidence exists in these anomalies, why does it still sit largely on the fringes? What other secrets might be hiding in plain sight, just waiting for us to, I don't know, truly open our minds and question what we think we know for certain? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the cool, weird, and possible. If you enjoyed exploring these pretty fascinating and mind-bending theories, be sure to subscribe to our channel. We'll have more deep dives like this coming your way.